Hello everyone, Ron Johnson here from L.T.L Tutoring Central, and if you're looking for tips and strategies to help with your learning, you are in the right place. From time to time, you might be asked to do some descriptive writing, or perhaps you just want to do some descriptive writing of your own if you're writing a fiction story or a novel, or even if you're writing academic papers or reports and you just want to make it very clear to the reader, to give a vivid picture. Descriptive writing is the way to go. You have to be careful with academic papers. Sometimes you don't want to get into too much poetic or description, but a good, clear, concise description or piece of descriptive writing can be very helpful to get your point across and for the reader to enjoy what they're reading and also to comprehend and understand it. If we enjoy what we're reading, we understand it much better as well. So in this video, I'm just going to talk about a few tips to help you get started on descriptive writing, because sometimes, particularly when students are given an assignment, they get stuck. I don't know what to write. I'm not sure what to say. How do I start? Where do I begin? There's nothing to say about this. I sometimes give a student an object, just something I gather around the house here where I do all my tutoring at the big table back here, other than my online, or ask them to find something if I'm doing online and just describe it. Or I provide a photograph and say, do a descriptive paragraph or a descriptive story based on this photograph. And you can do this yourself for practice if you like. I think it's a great idea, and it's a lot of fun too, because as you keep exploring, you learn more and more about that photograph or about that object. It could just be a toy, it could be an appliance around your house, it could be your back garden, whatever it is, a flower. The more you look at it and the more you think about it, and after I give you these tips, these will help too, you might be surprised just how much there is to say in terms of describing a certain scene or a certain object. And of course, in stories, you can be describing events, plot, etc. So first of all, use your five senses. This is something that's very easy to start off with, because often when we describe something, either verbally or in writing, we tend to lean very heavily, unless we're visually impaired, we lean heavily on sight. So we don't have too much trouble usually describing what we see. But remember that you have at least 4 other senses that you can use at your disposal. So think of the sounds. So if you're describing your garden, what are the sounds that you hear in your garden? Not just what you see, but what do you hear? Are there birds? Do you have a fountain? Is there water? Etc. Think of the smells. Obviously, if there are flowers or even weeds, what's the difference sometimes? Think of the smells of the grass, the smells of the flowers. Now, if you're describing, let's say, a stuffed toy, you might describe the smell, you might not. It might not be. So they don't all work in all situations, but just think about them and you might be surprised. Also, your sense of touch. Now, in the garden, you might, if you're just sitting there, you might not be touching anything, but you might actually. If you're walking in the garden, you'll feel the grass on your feet or under your shoes, or the gravel if you're on a pathway, perhaps. And if you're touching any of the objects within the garden, then you have a sense of touch. And the other example I was briefly saying, what about a stuffed toy or something like that? Well, of course, there's the texture, the feel, the touch, what it's made out of that you can talk about. Then there's taste. Again, you're not going to taste everything, but sometimes there's a taste even in the air. So in the garden, you can actually sometimes taste if there's a lot of pollen in the spring, which we've just come through recently, and everything was covered in yellow dust. You might be able to taste. You might taste. Here we have people who have wood stoves and fires, probably not on at this time of year, but you can sometimes taste the smoke in the air. You smell it, but you also taste it. Skunks. Oh, we have skunks around here, so that's also something. Now, and if you're describing a food, you can also describe obviously the taste and also the smells of the food. So think of all of your senses and how they might apply. Maybe some will not in a particular circumstance, but usually at least several of them can be used in your description. Also, use vivid adjectives and specific details. What do I mean by that? We tend to rely on adjectives that we use over and over and over again. These are often called overworked adjectives and adverbs as well, if you like. So, for example, big. You know, the car is big, the house is big, he's a big guy, etc. Everything's big. But be more specific. Use a more vivid adjective, a more descriptive adjective. So maybe it's colossal, maybe it's immense, maybe it's massive. And these won't work in every situation. So if you're using synonyms, if you're using a thesaurus and looking up words that you can use instead of the old tired words, just be sure that you understand the connotation and just be sure that it fits with what you're describing, because not all synonyms listed in a thesaurus are equal. They don't all have exactly the same meaning. They have similar meanings, but they're used in different circumstances. For example, small, you could use microscopic or cramped, but I would not use microscopic, well, probably not, to describe a lot of people within a small room. I would say that it was very cramped, but I might describe a bug that is very, very small as a microscopic. Even though it's not literally microscopic, the reader gets the picture or the image that this is a very, very small bug or very, very small thing, whatever you're describing. So these more vivid adjectives are better for describing, and it's better for the reader to understand, or not to understand necessarily, but to picture what you're saying. And I shouldn't just say picture. We often use picture when we're saying, talking about descriptive writing, but remember, it's all five senses. And I'm sure that you've had the experience that you smell something and it triggers a memory, or you hear a sound or a song and it triggers a memory. So our pictures are not just based on vision. They're based on all of our senses from time to time. Specific details. So instead of saying there were a lot or many, provide a statistic or give a number, you know, how many people were at the meeting. Instead of saying something had a large impact, name the impact. What was that impact? Be specific about it. Not only does that make the writing clearer, but it also helps you to expand in terms of your description, to get more volume and to make it more accurate and informative. And that's what's important. You don't want to add words just to add words. We don't want padded language. If you remember, we did a video a long time ago about that. But you want to add quality to your writing as well as the quantity. Also, one last point, organize your ideas. Try to put them in a sensible order, and that will vary depending upon what you're describing. So it could be spatial or geographical. This is often when you're describing something visual, so you might be just describing how it fits within the visual space. You could do chronological or time order. That would refer more to a story or a series of steps that you might have to take if you're explaining a procedure. For example, it could also be a plot, obviously, in a story, or order of significance. And you can go from most important to least important, but I would recommend most of the time going from the least important to the most important, because you often want to build a kind of suspense if you're doing fiction. But even in nonfiction, you want to build to your strongest point. Readers are accustomed to that, number one, and also we tend to remember often the things that we read or hear at the beginning and at the end, and we will remember better if there's a stronger impact at the end. So probably least important to most important is usually the best if you're ordering it in order of significance or order of importance. All right, those are just a few tips to help you get started. I hope you'll try some descriptive writing or try to expand your ability to describe. Sometimes it doesn't mean writing more. Sometimes it does mean writing less. But again, that's where the vivid adjectives can come into play. If you have the right adjectives or the right adverbs, your description can be actually shorter and still clearer than trying to use a lot of words to describe something that could have been done with fewer words. And using all of your senses can just make your description much more vivid as well, and it makes the writing easier for you if you start off with that. And in the beginning, don't worry too much about the quality. Just write as you think, sort of like brainstorming but longer, and you can and then come back during the editing process, and you can weed out the points that you don't really think are strong. You can restructure sentences to make them more concise, clearer, better, etc. So you don't need to do everything at once. But think of these things as you're writing, and then as you're editing, you can clear up the use better adjectives and adverbs, clear up the organization and all of that. All right, it's Ron Johnson from L.T.L. Tutoring Central. I think I'm starting to ramble. I tend to do that sometimes. I do make mistakes on these videos. I do not edit, so sorry about that. I create them so that I'm talking to you as if you were a student sitting right here at the big table in front of me or beside me, and we all make mistakes. So it's Ron Johnson from L.T.L. Tutoring Central. Keep learning, keep having fun. Until next time, bye-bye for now.